Join us on this week's episode of Beer Diplomacy with our guest, Leo Laporte. That's right, I said Leo Laporte, as we discuss sex ed, kid touching, presidents that bend over, and deep space exploration. Check us out at beerdiplomacytv.com.
I'm looking at Uncle Leo's
hat.
Yeah,
I am looking at Uncle Leo's hat, too.
I bow to our future overlords, the Chinese People's Republic.
They are our future overlords, Uncle Leo. Everything in that room right now is made in China.
So yeah, I mean, we had this conversation once before. Is it worth getting all the way back into, or can we just kind of all agree once again that this is pandering at its best?
You'd think Fox News would have something else to talk about.
Well, it's funny because I picked a bunch of articles this week, not expecting to touch upon them all, but that kind of allows us to at least touch a little bit upon the article here as well. That is that Fox News cut off the presidential news conference last week for Glenn Beck. So it's the same kind of thing.
Glenn's more entertaining, let's face it.
Yeah, he is, but this was a press conference, an unscripted press conference, and it was time for the Glenn Beck show, and they just feel that, what the president has to say isn't all that important.
Hey, can I just say that Fox is the only news channel getting any ratings? Their ratings are going up while everybody else is going down. They're obviously doing something right.
I don't know. It's Fox, right? Who takes Fox seriously?
Well, for ratings.
Let me ask a cultural question. I should know this because I was a Chinese major in college. Do the Chinese people bow to each other like the I know the Japanese people bow to each other. Do the Chinese people, is that a cultural thing where they bow to each other?
I was in China for a month. I didn't bow to nobody.
Was he confused?
I think he might have been confused. But
I think he thought he was talking to a Japanese fella.
Yeah, I think so as well. But
what's up with him bowing to the Arabian Nights?
That I don't understand at all.
Yeah.
Does he do? Now wait a minute. Now come on, guys. If you met the Queen of England, she's this tall. You would bow to her.
What? That's not bowing. That's like kissing her hand or shaking her hand or something.
Kissing her hand.
He's bent over at the hips. He is bent.
They jump you, dude.
I guess.
I personally don't think there's anything wrong with being diplomatic in those situations. Kill them with kindness.
It's not like he gave them the keys to the White House and said, "Move on in."
Oh, that's what he did when he said, "We're not going to nuke anybody back." Boom, boom.
Oh,
that was funny.
Yeah,
you opened that up for me, Uncle Leo. I appreciate that. Is there another topic? Because we got to have a wrap up and let Uncle Leo.
Yeah, I think so. Leo, how are you looking on time?
We got 13 minutes.
12.3 minutes.
12.3 minutes. So let's see real quick. I know that you probably can't talk about this in 12.3 minutes, but as we all know, Comcast won a victory over the FCC last week or towards the end of last week. I know you spent a decent amount of time talking about it this weekend on Twit, but just for our listeners, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing some of your thoughts on that, I consider it a major blow against those of us who are for all of the the neutral internet policies. But I'd like to hear it from a guy who spends his living talking about these things. So
it's a very complicated issue. So here's what happened. You probably remember it. Comcast some years ago was actively monitoring its customers' connections to the internet, and if they saw you were using BitTorrent, they have a box. They used to have a box called Sandvine that would send out a signal to the BitTorrent server saying, "I'm all done," and disconnect you. It would in fact impersonate you and disconnect the BitTorrent. So the upshot of that was people who were using BitTorrent on Comcast would eventually not be able to use it. It would stop. You'd be going along and boom, it would just stop. So people discovered this. Actually, with some very interesting detective work. I think it was the EFF did it to discover what was going on and brought suit. And in the initial court case, or the initial case, it was a civil suit. The FCC ruled that you can't do that. Slapped Comcast with a fairly hefty fine. Comcast has taken out these Sandvine servers. They don't use them anymore, and says we don't do that anymore. Nevertheless, they fought it, and it went to the District of Columbia's Court of Appeals, which is notoriously anti-government regulation. And now I've had some really interesting back and forth, and I've read a lot about this. I'm not a lawyer. Even lawyers disagree on what this means. The FCC has some very specific mandates. Congress tells it what you can regulate, what it can't regulate. But there is also kind of implicit mandate to regulate some other things, including, many believe, the internet. The court, according to telecommunications experts who've talked to me and tell me I was wrong, the court has apparently said it's not that you can't regulate the internet, but you did it wrong this time. So they haven't completely overturned the FCC's authority to regulate the internet, but they have, what they've done is cast this into doubt, that anybody the FCC slaps around, let's say AT&T says, oh, you can't use Skype on our systems anymore. FCC goes after them. AT&T knows perfectly well if they appeal this to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, that they have a very good chance it'll be overturned. So it casts the FCC's authority into doubt only because it's not very clear. Now, the FCC could continue to do what it's doing and try to regulate the internet. You know, the current FCC chairman, Julius Genachowski, is very committed to net neutrality. It does not affect their broadband plan. I think this was very clear, that the FCC's broadband plan is not impacted by this. It's merely whether they would be able to enforce net neutrality.
But doesn't it just require...
There's disagreement about whether the FCC should be. A lot of very smart people, including people at the EFF, not all of them, but some people at the EFF think, do we really want the government regulating the internet? We don't know if that's a good thing.
But doesn't this just require Congress to give those powers to the FCC? And not that could happen immediately.
The FCC could go to Congress and say, look, we need explicit... If they had explicit powers, it would be much harder for a court to overturn it. However, I think we as geeks ought to really think twice. Do we want Congress to say to the FCC, yeah, we have a good FCC today, but that changes. It's a political appointee. Do we want them to give them the power to regulate the internet? I'm not sure that's a good thing. Comcast said, and I think this is the salient question. Comcast said, this is a great decision. It means the market will rule. And, you know, we're a free market kind of country. We like the free market. If there were truly a free market, I would agree. I think that if you had a choice of 10 ISPs and 5 of them are preventing you from using BitTorrent, there's at least some incentive for a few of them to not do that, and they would win customers. The problem is that, and this goes back to the FCC gave the cable companies and the phone companies in your town a duopoly, an effective monopoly, saying, you guys, you're going to invest in copper, you're going to invest in physical plants, we're going to give you the sole right to the home, to the copper to the home. So they have this kind of incumbent position as internet service provider. And so most communities have at best 2 choices. And that's why there's no free market. And that's why Comcast can, frankly, get away with this.
Don't you think also to a certain extent it puts the onus now more on software publishers to host their own data? I know, for example, some people back in my World of Warcraft days, when Blizzard would come out with an update, they put that on a torrent server.
Right.
And I know people on Comcast who couldn't get updates because they were on torrent servers.
Linux distributions. There's all sorts of legal uses for BitTorrent. By the way, Comcast says it wasn't the illegality we didn't like. It was the bandwidth hogs we didn't like.
Well, let me tell you one thing about that real quick. I'm paying currently $120 a month, and I'm supposed to have 50 down and 30 up. And I get about 25 down, and maybe at max I've had 7 up. And I call them, and I'm like, so you know you guys owe me money, right? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm not getting anywhere near the speeds I'm supposed to get. And every time I call, the next day, I have those speeds. 2 days later, the speed goes down. Because, of course, I start using it, right?
Right.
So they see me using that bandwidth, and they're like, holy shit, we got to turn this guy the fuck off. Like, I'm like, no.
I do
turn
believe
it back
that they
on.
do that.
I'm paying for this because I upload my videos and stuff to someone else and hosting and things. So they're still cutting me off at the knees, and they could do that.
Nobody likes Comcast. That's why they decided to rename their service Extensis.
Yeah. Xfinity.
Everybody hates Comcast.
Yeah.
But I don't know if this is about Comcast. I think this is really a fundamental question about how you regulate the net, how you preserve an open internet. We not all agree that an open, free internet is fundamental to the future of this country, the future of technology, the future of innovation. I mean, this is what we need. This show wouldn't exist without such a thing.